So I read a book, and calling it a book is a generous term. It's better described as a pond of red herrings, and I am an unfortunate fisherman tethered to the dock, hoping to find one actual fish in the swath of red. Never in my life have I read a book that was just mentally watching the star rating trickle from 5 stars all the way down to 1 star. I actually originally rated it as 2 stars, and then I brought it all the way down to 1 because I take off stars per misused slurs and unnecessary racist terms, and the main character refers to someone's tardiness as Indian time. This book was published in 2021, my dudes. Dear Alex Michaelides, I beg of you, please research the idioms you used before you send it to publish. Please. This book is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. It's another Goodreads Choice nominee, and I'm not really surprised the book wasn't great. Goodreads Choice is a popularity contest, and Michaelides is best known for The Silent Patient, and that's my best guess as to how this mess of a novel got published in the first place. If you loved this novel, bless your heart, bless your soul. I did not, and I'm going to get into it intensely, in great detail, so Discourse is great, as long as we're all being polite to each other. And to establish my credibility, I have a bachelor's in creative writing with minors in game design and religion. Michaelides is Greek. I'm not going to be commenting on the accuracy of Greek polytheism and spirituality because that's his culture. I trust that he knows what he's saying when he discusses it. Spoilers ahead for The Maidens. All of it. And Gone Girl. I mean, there's a couple of other books that I talk about, but I feel like I only spoiled Gone Girl. What does The Maidens refer to? What does the title refer to? Because that's what we're here with. The discussion, my opener, we're talking about the title. So, The Maidens, as a term for this novel, has multiple meanings. Meaning number 1, in its most literal sense for the book, it's the name of the elite group of female students that are favored by Edward Fosca, the professor that is initially the first suspect for the murders. All of the victims are a member of the Maidens, Veronica, Serena, Tara. Spoiler, but Edward Fosca is having sex with all of the women in this group, and in order to join, you have to go through a ritual from ancient Greek polytheism that's been bastardized for Fosca's gain. And when I say it's been bastardized, I mean that in like a very good narrative way. It's not that like Michaelides did it wrong. It's that he created a character who intentionally changed how the ritual worked in order to personally gain from it. It was a good piece of storytelling, one of the few pieces of good storytelling in this particular book. Second meaning is about the taking of Persephone. So Persephone's name prior to her kidnapping is Kore, which is Greek for maiden. I didn't know that until I read this book, but I wasn't surprised because while there's some etymological debate about her name's origin, I did know that Hera, the name Hera, is believed to have roots that mean mistress or lady, so I'm not really surprised that Kore means maiden. Mariana, the main character, expresses a religious sentiment towards Persephone and Demeter, the daughter and the mother. She's more focused on Demeter's role in the taking of Persephone and the mother-daughter aspect. In the story, she's haunted by this moment where she prayed to Persephone to protect her love and family, and in the days that followed, her husband Sebastian was mysteriously taken by the sea. The only good thing to come out of this like mediocre mess of an ending is that when you think back on it, Mariana's prayer was answered. Persephone's name means bringer of death, and it made perfect sense that when Mariana prayed to her for her family to be safe, she killed the person responsible for putting at risk Sebastian. It's important to note that Zoe, another character, is Mariana's niece, but is like a daughter because Mariana's sister died when Zoe was young. So the Persephone-Demeter comparison is with Mariana and Zoe, and then Hades is sort of Sebastian. And this is not Lore Olympus Hades. This is not Hades Town Hades. This is bad Hades. This is like the worst version of the taking of Persephone's, the worst version of Hades. So the third meaning is in English dialect, maiden refers to typically an unmarried woman. And since Western culture has spent a large portion of history pressing the idea of saving your virginity until marriage, maidenhood can also be associated with virgin girls. Once you've married and once you've consummated the marriage, you're no longer a maiden and you're no longer a virgin. This is important for the characterization of Zoe. She fits this ideal role, the unmarried, innocent girl, but by the end of the novel, it's revealed she's far from innocent and is not the maiden that Mariana assumed her to be because her husband is a pedophile and assaulted Zoe. There's no way to sugarcoat it. I don't know what the properly censored word is so that the algorithm doesn't eat the video, but I don't know how else to talk about it. That's what he is, and the book never calls him that, and that's kind of gross to me. With the title heavily entrenched in all of these meanings, you'd think that I would think that it's a great title. It's not. Like everything else in this book, it's a red herring. Too long, didn't read the plot. Mariana Andros' niece calls her because her friend Tara Hampton was murdered. Mariana, with her occupation as a group therapist, shows up and investigates the murders, looking at Professor Edward Fosca, who studies Greek tragedy, and his weird group of favorite students, the Maidens. She's determined to prove that it's Edward, even if it puts her life in danger. Hint, hint, guys. It's not Edward. He does get fired for abusing his position of power, but he didn't kill anyone. Turns out Sebastian and Zoe were in love and were planning to murder Mariana by using the Maidens as a way to disguise her murder. And then because Sebastian died suddenly in an accident while on vacation with Mariana, Zoe snapped mentally and began to sort of pull the strings of murders by herself to finish what her and Sebastian had started and originally planned. Red herrings. Okay. Red herrings are the clues and concepts added to a story to cause a distraction from the truth. Michaelides loved using these because almost every single character is designed to be a red herring to distract us from Sebastian and Zoe. But the reality is, there's nothing to distract us from, because Sebastian and Zoe, they come out of nowhere. There's not enough supporting evidence to indicate foul play, and Michaelides basically admits in his own writing that he didn't put too much thought into this kind of twist. There's like a scene where Mariana, there are these postcards. Every victim receives a postcard, and that they have a Greek, several lines of Greek that is a line in a tragedy of how a girl gets murdered, and every victim gets one, and Mariana and both Zoe get one. And there's when Mariana sees Zoe, she's like, I don't even bother getting it translated because it doesn't matter. But it does. It matters so much because it could have been a repeated passage. It could have been the same one, like not even the same one that Mariana had, just like it could be a repeated one or one that's not about death. It could be something that could clue in the reader that something's not exactly right, that Zoe's postcard is different from all of the others. And maybe in the moment we're not really thinking about it because Mariana's probably not thinking about it because, like, you know, tensions are rising. And then when the reveal happens, we could be like, oh, that's why Zoe's didn't make sense. But no, Michaelides is just like, it doesn't matter. Like, oh my goodness, you couldn't come up with one more. It is so obvious that Michaelides didn't want us to know who did it until he made the dramatic reveal, which is positively annoying. Thrillers aren't fun when authors do this. I don't particularly love Gone Girl for a multitude of reasons. But the first half of the book is a changing point of view from Nick to Amy's journal. 50% through this section, I began suspecting that the journal was fabricated based on what was going on in the world state. The midpoint revealed that I was right. It was fabricated. Thrillers are at their best when they aren't afraid of their audience figuring out bits and pieces of the plot. It's impossible to make a thriller work well if your goal is to surprise 100% of your readers. The difficulty of writing good thrillers is the balance of giving enough information in such a way that everything connects together really well without being heavy-handed and obvious. In Gone Girl, I didn't know Amy was alive. That was a genuinely good twist because Flynn put in the legwork for that outcome to be entirely possible. I felt intellectually satisfied that I was picking up on what Gillian Flynn was hinting at, and rewarded with being correct when I guessed that Amy had fabricated the journal to get Nick to take the fall for her murder. There's not enough in the Maidens that could substantially point at Zoe or Sebastian. And I mainly say that because the Maidens is also a dual POV, and I could not care for the killer's POV. I came into this video knowing that there were some awfully dreadful parts of this book I couldn't be bothered to read because it was so boring and dramatic and uninteresting, because Michaelides wasn't interested in telling us a story, he was interested in feeding us distracting information. The only useful piece of information I remember from those sections that I did read was that the killer POV confirmed itself to be male. But that also was a red herring, since the POV wasn't even the actual killer. Amy's journal in Gone Girl was an entirely different plot thread. She gave us the start of the relationship to the day she goes missing, while Nick gives us the end of the relationship and, of course, everything past the day she goes missing. It was an intentionally unreliable retelling of Amy and Nick's relationship that Amy confirms is dramatized to vilify Nick so that he goes to prison for her murder. But most importantly, Amy's journal serves as a story, and it helps characterize how insane Amy is psychologically. Sebastian's letter is just dramatic. I will admit, I was immediately turned off the moment he said there were two parts of him fighting for control and the monster would come out and hurt people, and he didn't want that to happen. It all felt like excuse making. And while I can understand the argument that someone as egotistical as him would write something like that, it was boring. At the end of the line, it was just boring. I didn't want to read it. I ended up skipping most of those sections because I just couldn't be bothered by reading something like that. Now we're going to talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I hate Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The story itself is an alright story about someone with a personality disorder. I subscribe to a rather feminist interpretation that Dr. Jekyll made up Mr. Hyde as a scapegoat for all of his bad behavior so that he as Dr. Jekyll could remain a pure gentleman while taking no accountability for the crimes he had committed. And perhaps along the way actually started believing that Mr. Hyde actually existed. It's a hot take. People will differ on it. That's fine. The point is that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is interesting because it was a very specific kind of story about a specific presentation of a specific personality disorder. Everyone mimicking this presentation with absolutely no change or unique spin, like being possessed by a ghost. It feeds into the stereotype that people suffering from personality disorders have an inner monster that needs to be contained. That's just false, and when writers want to tell these stories, you need to consider the ethics of writing these stories. Because I don't think Michaelides wanted to humanize offending pedophiles by implying there's a split personality between the rational man and the monster who wants to harm minors. And that the rational man can be good and forgiven, because that's how I interpreted it. And I don't think that's what he meant, but that's a valid interpretation of your work, Michaelides. And so you really should have thought this through. You need to really attack all of the possible interpretations of your novel. I know that a possible interpretation of the novel I'm working on is about someone leaving Christianity and becoming a pagan witch. I know that could be an interpretation. It's not. It has absolutely nothing to do with either of those things. I just picked up on the fact that could be a possible interpretation, and that I'm ready when I go to publish, that I'm ready that people might see it like that. I don't want them to see it like that. That's not what I'm saying, that's not what it's about, but I know that some people will think that anyways. And for me, I'm personally unbothered by it, right? There's a reason why people leave Christianity and there's reasons why people turn to paganism. Some people turn to paganism, but like Jesus is still their God. Like they find more comfort in pagan practices within Christianity more than the structure of Christianity itself. It's like, so you have to think as hard as you can about all the ways that your story can be interpreted, because if you hit some real big red flag ones like this, you need to think, do you really want to put a story out there that could be potentially saying this? How is someone who is going to be a victim, a minor who is a victim, what are they going to think when they read this? That this is what you think about offending pedophiles. This is what you think of them. It's insane. I wish that writers and ethics in writing was talked about more. It's definitely not talked about enough that we have to be talking about ethics in writing, because this is just a dangerous story that hurts everybody involved. When I started reading Sebastian's letter, I thought it was going to be like, there's a human part of him. It's okay that he was murdering people, which is like another reason why I stopped reading Sebastian's letter. But I mean, by the end, it got way worse. Way worse. I am not going to be rooting for this guy. No. So why doesn't The Maidens work as a title? The Maidens doesn't work as a title because, as I said, it's a red herring. The title is giving emphasis on something, whether Michaelides intended or not, and it's telling us to look at the maidens. They're the key in the story. In thrillers, the title is like a really good tool to help point the readers in the right direction. Gone Girl, the title itself, is a hint at Amy's motivation. Her cool girl monologue, which is one of the few parts of the book I liked.
Cool girl is hot. Cool girl is gay. Cool girl is fun. Cool girl never gets angry at her man. She only smiles in a chagrin-loving manner.
Discusses the performance of girls being one of the guys in order to gain male attention and have status in a predominantly male social group, and how that's what drove her off the deep end. She didn't want to perform this personality. She wanted to be herself. And it says a lot about Amy's ego that there's no acknowledgement that there's a demographic of women who are cool girl in order to shed their femininity and wear misogynistic masculinity in order to gain male attention because they simply just want the attention. They attempt to become one of the guys to be seen as male because they think hating other women and hating traditional femininity makes them cool and desirable by the men in their lives. There's a difference between a woman conforming because it's the only way she feels like she can survive in this environment, and a pick-me girl. And it's interesting that Amy doesn't have much to say about pick-me girls. And in the book, Amy is shedding her cool girl persona and she is becoming the Gone Girl. And that's good. It's got depth. And the Maidens effectively tricks us so that we're focusing on the Maidens when we shouldn't be. The Maidens being the group of students favored by Edward Fosca, the guy that Mariana thinks is the murderer up until the very end. When in reality, they almost mean nothing to the plot. Even though three of these maidens are murdered in the story, and a fourth, Zoe, is technically a part of the maidens, is the killer. Zoe confirms that she and Sebastian set up this whole plan in order to murder Mariana and to hide Mariana's death in the maiden murders simply as like victim number 4, with Edward Fosca taking the fall because Zoe just managed to hide a bunch of incriminating evidence in his office and personal quarters. It's so lazy. The amount of gymnastics that Michaelides had to string together in order to get this ending to work, it just, what?
Sebastian, stop this madness.
Now, logically, you and I both know that Mariana's death would have been an intense outlier, and a genuine investigation would have led back to Zoe, but honestly, the fact it was a poorly made plan worked, because Zoe's not all there, and Sebastian wasn't in a clear mental state either, right? So we have handwriting analysis on the postcards. They wouldn't come back as Edward's. Edward has an alibi for the first murder with the whole group of maidens, but the other maidens that confirm his other alibis are dead. That's suspicious. Why would Edward murder his own alibis? Zoe got a postcard, and someone besides Mariana knew that. So with Mariana dead, the police would put Zoe in witness protection, and when no one shows up to murder her, that could be suspicious. And then also, Zoe wasn't wearing gloves when she had the knife to murder Mariana. DNA would be on that. I could keep going But you get the point. While Zoe thinks this is a master plan, it's actually really poorly thought out in the small details, and that's where Zoe would have gotten caught. And I did like that the murder plan reflected the mental state of the people who made it. But the point remains is that the Maidens, as a title, is annoyingly distracting. It's a buzzword to draw readers in, and it doesn't hold any depth like Gone Girl or other books like Little Fires Everywhere or Silence. So what would I have called it? My first, I have two title suggestions. One is Mariana. This is a novel where naming it after the character actually makes sense. It then grounds the reader in the reminder that no matter what, this is going to circle back to Mariana somehow. It'll feel more rewarding when the reveal of the murder plot was always to kill Mariana, and that would be more satisfying because the title was warning us right from the beginning. Don't forget about Mariana. Mariana's the important one. Mariana, Mariana, Mariana. The other one is Island of Naxos. This would have been good since Sebastian is the villain of the story and that's where he died. While we're tricked at the beginning to think that his death is just character building for Mariana, the title could be a consistent, gentle reminder that what happened there has more significance that we think that Sebastian, because that's what the Island of Naxos is eventually pointing to, that Sebastian has a bigger role in the story than we think. The title, especially in thrillers, the title can do so much work. It is so important. And now that we're done talking about the title, I'm going to talk about other stuff unrelated to the title because I have some other gripes with this book, including, I'm sure you're surprised for me to say this, the red herrings. Because it's a pond of red herrings, we have a lot of side characters that serve almost no purpose. Mariana has a patient named Henry. He's very disturbed. He shows up and stalks Mariana and attacks him about halfway through the book, and he's taken away to jail. Serves no purpose. He's there to just distract the plot. Take him out. He doesn't need to be there. I mean, I liked him at the beginning because he was like, he served really well to characterize how Mariana handles group therapy with specifically someone who is troubled. And I thought that was good. I didn't like that he came back. I thought that he was just a good introduction, characterization of Mariana, and then he served his purpose. Fred is just some random guy who claims to be psychic and just shows up at the end of the book to take a knife wound from Mariana. I think in one section he mentions he grew up on a farm, and that's one of the pieces of information I remembered from Sebastian's letter, so I thought that Fred might have been the killer, which honestly, I would have been alright if it was Fred or Elise. Elise is the cleaning lady from Tara's bedroom, and I genuinely thought it was Elise for a while who did it until, like, the letter confirmed it to be Ming. She's got some odd traits that make her suspicious, but other than that, she's forgettable. I think the story would have been more interesting if it was Fred or Elise, just like these... Fred with his weird fixation on Mariana the moment she got there, Elise just being really weird. Thought it would have been cool, but of course you wouldn't have been able to do the whole Zoe plotline. Ruth is Mariana's, like, psychologist person. Mariana goes there for a therapy session, and Ruth tells her that everything harkens back to Mariana's daddy issues. This feels like a men writing women moment. Mariana's father is brought up. She has some mixed feelings about him, but I don't think her father is brought up enough to justify a chapter dedicated to Mariana being told that she's too focused on her daddy issues and it's clouding her judgment. That happens. That is a thing that happens in this book. I'm sorry? Is this a Descendants movie?
You're stronger with those daddy issues.
Also, the Maidens themselves. We don't really get to know any of them beyond that they're all foreign and rich, and I recall that that's like a significant thing to the Maidens' lore. I think it's like with Agamemnon's daughter and the idea of killing the daughter of a nobleman to honor Artemis. I don't know. I don't feel bad that any of them died because they were all written to die. They don't have a personality. They don't really have anything at all. They're nothing. They're a set of names. And then there's Julian and Theo. There's some other psychologists who are there to propel the plot forward. That's all. And Theo is there to tie up all loose ends. They're just not important. All of these characters are just not important. Psychology. We're going to talk about psychology. As someone who has had years of therapy, I take issue with how therapists in this story, and by extension, Alex Michaelides is view on how good mental health practice is supposed to be conducted. Therapists don't tell you all of your problems stem from any one issue. They guide you to it so you can make the conclusion yourself, because people don't react well when their worldview is being broken down. We actually saw this in the book when Ruth was like, yeah, this is all about your daddy issues. And Mariana's like, no, it's not. What the? You just don't do that. And I've never been in group therapy, but I genuinely felt uncomfortable by all the group therapy scenes. The Maiden group therapy also just felt like Michaelides glanced at Freudian psychology, went to sleep, and then wrote from memory the next morning. It was uncomfortable to read that these grown women were discussing their professor like a father figure. It was just uncomfortable. Now we're going to talk about the role of privileged knowledge. The fact that Mariana is a citizen attempting to solve a murder only harms this story. Mariana could have been a forensic psychologist like Julian, either to replace Julian, or Julian is brought in when Zoe is being examined in order to prevent bias, and there can be some healthy rivalry between the two psychologists. What we need, essentially, is Mariana to step into a role of privileged knowledge, a role she can occupy that allows her access to the crime scenes, potential suspects, victims, witnesses, and evidence. Frankly, it was just annoying that something we had to constantly hurdle over was Mariana having no right to investigate. If she were a forensic psychologist, it would have made more sense for Zoe and Sebastian to set up their murder plot, because they plan to ensure Mariana got put on the case. Instead, we've got scene after scene of her not being actually allowed anywhere, and it doesn't help the story, it distracts from it. In real life, Mariana would have been charged with whatever the British version of obstruction of justice is. Fiction lets us live in this pretend world that tenacious citizens can solve a murder better than police. But for me, you really gotta sell me on why a citizen is solving it, because this does not hit the mark. In Gone Girl, Nick doesn't trust the police because they think he did it, and he actively hides information from them because he thinks he can solve it himself before the police can arrest him wrongly. In Men Who Hate Women, the girl with the dragon tattoo, Elizabeth is a computer hacker, and Michael is a journalist hired by the family and is given complete access to the disappearance case. He has access to everything because he's hired by the guy whose daughter or granddaughter went missing. And in the last thing he told me, Hannah is suspicious of the police because of the situation at hand, and she just erroneously investigates her husband's secret past because she's desperate for answers. And what makes all three of these books work is that there's no active crime scenes. Well, Gone Girl has an active crime scene, but Nick is the one who discovered it and is interrogated about it, so there's a reason for his familiarity. Point is, these three novels put in the work to justify why non-law enforcement are solving the case. The Maidens doesn't have that. It's just Mariana because she's related to the victim, and because it's active crime scenes and she's not supposed to be there. It's frustrating on how many times she's yelled at to leave because it's literally not her job to solve it. If you want to write thrillers but you don't want to write cops, you have to get your protagonists into a role of privileged knowledge. You have to give them a reason to be there, because constantly sneaking into crime scenes and evading police is it's so distracting. Just write a cop. You're just literally just write a cop. Alright, that's it. I really had high hopes for this book. I was excited. I didn't like it at all. I do not recommend anyone read it. I would not recommend anyone who's been a victim of abuse read it because of the implications that it has. And tell me your thoughts about The Maidens. Did you love it? Please explain to me in heavy detail why you loved this book. I would genuinely like to know. And that's not even to be insulting. Everyone has different tastes, and I would love to genuinely know what about this book hooked you. And I would love to know, if you 5-starred it, what was it for you? Alright, that's it. Goodbye.